It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Whenever we see our first quarter, people start using the R word. Is this a recession? Is a recession coming? So we thought it'd be valuable to define for you what is a recession. And very simply, a recession refers to a significant decline in economic activity. It's generally recognized as 2 consecutive quarters of decline in GDP. So if we have another quarter with GDP negative, then that technically would qualify as a recession.
Well, recession, I think, makes people get nervous because it's not just the stock market. This actually impacts financial, not the stock market, but also the housing market, the employment numbers. There's a lot of ripple effects that come when the economy's in struggling and having issues.
And one of those ripple effects that we often see is negative stock market performance. Now, I want to be clear. We're going to talk a little bit in a moment about bear markets. A bear market and a recession are not the same thing, but they often go hand in hand. And for most of us, the way that we feel recessions on a very personal level is what's going on in our portfolio, what's happening in our retirement accounts, what's happening with our army of dollar bills. And generally speaking, in recessionary times, that's often reflected in the way the market performs, which sometimes turns into an actual bear market.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the positive side. When markets are up from the bottom 20%, that's a bull market.
That's a bull market.
We all like those. Those feel great. You feel like a genius while you're investing and making that automatic money. However, when markets from the peak lose 20%, that's considered a bear market. What is interesting is that you don't have to have a recession to have a bear market, but it is interesting when you look at the numbers that recessions are an indicator that bear markets are right around the corner. One of the best things is one thing to tell you, hey, it's going to be good, just hang in there, but I know it emotionally hurts. It pulls all these behavioral things where you feel like react. What do I need to be doing to cope with the losses I'm seeing on my financial statements, on my net worth statement? I'm seeing this stuff all over social media. We actually, and Bo, I want to give you credit for this. You said, look, I think we just have to go with it. I mean, when people are stressed out, the first thing you can tell them, and this is going to be a little bit of a contrarian take here, Bo came up with have a drink.
Yeah, sometimes when things are uncomfortable from the financial world, we have to take a drink. We have to step back. We wanted you guys to have a very easy way to remember this, an easy way to think of this. And it's basically a 5-step process to prepare yourself for the next recession if that's coming. And here are the 5 steps, and then we'll dive in each one. Do a plan assessment. Recognize risk tolerance versus risk capacity, how they're different and how that impacts you. Ignore the noise. Notice any silver lining opportunities. And then the last thing, and possibly the most important thing, is know that this too shall pass. If you can kind of work through this 5-step process, whenever the markets freak out, whenever the economy freaks out, you're going to set yourself up most likely to be able to get through it just fine. I think a lot of folks don't recognize, they're just kind of letting life happen. You get out of college and you start working, and maybe you're saving or maybe you're not, but you haven't thought about the whys and the whats. You need to answer the question, do I actually have a plan in place? If I don't, step 1 would be, hey, I need to develop some sort of financial plan, some sort of way to tactically think about what I'm doing with my army of dollar bills and how I'm doing that. Well, then once you have that plan in place, you ought to think about, have things recently happened that have made me get off kilter? Perhaps did I let myself get too far out over my skis from a risk perspective, right? The markets have been performing really well. Did I start chasing some things that maybe I shouldn't have been chasing? This is a great time to really reassess that and say, okay, do I have a plan in place? And is that plan in place actually a good one?
Yeah, and think about life events too. I mean, what's going on out there? Should you update and adjust from that? And then, Bo, this is an important one, and I love it when we get feedback off of this, because one of the great things when people take listeners and everybody takes the relationship to the next level. They love when we actually do that retirement plan and we stress test it. We try to figure out, is this thing broken? And you actually put it into this. You said, hey, have you Monte Carlo'd up?
That's right. Exactly. So one of the things we want to know is it's easy for us to think about the best case scenario. I'm going to retire. I'm going to build my army of dollar bills. I'm going to retire and I'm going to sail off. I'm going to sail off into the sunset.
Sailboat
off into the sunset. If you have not stress tested your thing, say, well, what if I retire at a bad time? I mean, a lot of the comments right now coming in are, hey, is now a good time to retire? Should I postpone it? One of the ways that you can go into this with some security, and we do this for our clients, is by doing a Monte Carlo scenario on your portfolio. If I have this much money and I'm planning on doing these types of things and I want to spend this level of money and I have this type of income and I'm going to live for this long and I want to assume this type of return, and I run through different iterations of those variables, what's my probability of success? That even if I get unlucky and I retire at the worst time in the worst market with the worst stuff going on, do I have a high probability of success I'm going to make it through that? If you've not stress tested your portfolio, or if you stress tested it but you've not revisited it, now might be a really good time to do that, to assess, is the plan that I have in place still the best plan for me?
Yeah, that's why when you're younger and you're just creating the napkin plan, you can use the 4% withdrawal rate. You can do all kind of simple back of the napkin type stuff. Mm-hmm. But as you do get closer, like I say, when you're within 5 years of retirement,
Absolutely.
This is a very valuable tool that's going to give you the peace of mind to know that you can handle whatever is coming your way. And then the last thing on this point I would point out is just your cash management. Do you have cash reserves? Are you actually taking into account, because that's what's going to get you through any volatility you might be facing, is if you have the cash, you have the liquidity, so that you're not facing this as an emergency of, oh my goodness, how am I going to pay the bills?
Absolutely. All right, so that's the D, do a plan assessment. The R in having a drink is recognizing the difference in risk tolerance and risk capacity. One of the things you have to make sure you keep a beat on is, do I have the correct amount of risk on, risk off assets? I mean, it's very, very easy. In such a strong bull market that we've come through, we begin to misassess our own risk tolerance. When things are going good, we feel great. We feel like we can be a cowboy. We feel like nothing is going to frighten us. But when things start to turn, I think Warren Buffett's the one who says, you can always tell who's been skinny dipping when the tide goes out. A lot of people's true risk capacity is uncovered in a downturn. And if you find yourself in that situation, that's where you have to make really difficult decisions. You have to pare back lifestyle. You have to sell assets. You have to figure out a way to make things work. If you can get the risk capacity right on the front end, you're going to set yourself up for long-term success. And the way you do that from a portfolio standpoint is understanding I need some portion of my portfolio in risk assets. Even if I'm retiring, odds are I'm going to have a 20, 30, 40-year retirement. I need some portion of my portfolio to exist in that bucket. But if I am living off of these assets, if this is what's going to provide for my daily, monthly, weekly, yearly need, I need some portion of risk off or risk reduced assets. The correct portfolio for you mixes those, that no matter whether the market goes up 30% or down 30%, you are positioned well to live the type of lifestyle you want to live over the long term.
And I've mentioned this before. This is also back to risk tolerance versus risk capacity. That cash buffer, this is what's going to change from when you're working and you have decades before you retire. You can have a cash reserves of 3 to 6 months, because that's to protect you from the sudden, maybe you have a medical expense or you lose your job or things like that. As you approach retirement, though, you could see that cash reserves balloon up to 18 to 36 months, because you're living off this money. You want to make sure you have enough money and liquidity and access to capital that if the stock market's down 30%, 40%, you can be there and have liquidity for the 2 to 3 years it takes for it to recover, and you don't have to sell a distressed asset. Don't neglect the ability to have some access to liquidity. I know cash doesn't pay much, but you will appreciate it. It is no different. I say this all the time. Your cash is like oxygen. We all take it for granted until we're underwater, and then we're like, oh, man, I'm so glad I have this oxygen tank on me. Your emergency reserves is that oxygen tank when the economy goes underwater.
And you have to remember, what is the purpose of those? Those dollars are not necessarily supposed to grow. Now, we've recently seen some interest rate increases, so it's likely that savings accounts will start paying us money on our cash again. But we've been living in this place right now where cash has been paying nothing. And while that stinks, it's not something you can get away from. It is a necessary part of your portfolio, specifically if you are someone who's transitioning into financial independence or retirement. You just can't ignore it. You just can't not do it.
The I think this one's so important too. Ignore the noise.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Brian. We were talking in show prep about how there's only been one bear market in the past, 50 years that lasted over 2 years or so. And it was back at the .com bubble burst. And you're like, man, I was doing this back then. I was managing money back then. I'm curious to know, from your perspective, do you think the financial world is louder or less loud now than it was then? Meaning, has it gotten more difficult to ignore the noise than perhaps it was 20 or 30 years ago?
I definitely think that, because look, the internet existed, hence .com bubble bursting, but social media was not on the scene yet. And I do feel like social media has added a lot more noise and voices in the background, and you just don't get away from it. This is a little off topic, but we always talk about like bullying. When I was a kid, you only had to worry about a bully picking on you, maybe in your woodworking class, right, or while you were in school. Whereas now you have to worry about, are you going to get people picking on you even when you leave the school? Well, it's the same way with the way you guys, what you let in your brain with sources of information while you're going through a market downturn like this, is that it used to be, hey, as long as I made it through this week or whatever. Now, think about like cryptocurrencies and things like those. Markets don't even close. It used to be that markets were open Monday through Friday. Now markets are open 24 hours a day. It's so wild that we have inundated ourselves with social media. We're trying to create ways that we can always be on. This does not make your job easier. So we wanted to talk about what you need to understand, key understandings that will protect you from the noise that could make you react and actually hurt your long-term financial success. I think if I was giving somebody who's new to investing a key piece of advice, people always say, how do you know the market's going to go up? And I always say, and be careful, because the experts will roll out like this one. This headline from the Wall Street Journal from 2017 said, soaring assets. That's a positive, typically. Low unemployment, that's another positive. But now they're telling you, hey, because of all this positive stuff, you should be scared. They will always pull out little tidbits of information and use that to give them the expert status. But what they never talk about is what's actually happening in the long term. Is if you could look at the economy, say 20 years ago to where the economy is now, it's just bigger. It's natural. Because I think it's part of being the human condition, is we are always looking to expand, grow, build, innovate. And when you invest, and we're always talking about index investing and other things, you're basically buying into that concept that we're building a great, big, beautiful tomorrow where the world is innovating and getting bigger and better. So it's much easier to understand that you're buying into something for the long term than getting caught up in the minutia, the noise, as we talked about in the drink system. This is the stuff to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. If you think about how financial media works, right? It's not often because they're telling a pleasant story. It's not often because they're saying, hey, things are great. You should be excited. Things are going to be okay. It's often because they want to get you scared. They want to sell fear, because fear will keep you tuned in. So you can't let fear become the primary driver behind your financial decisions. If you begin to do that, you begin to make mistakes and you begin to deviate from the plan that should have been good before the craziness happened, that should still be good while the craziness is going on, and will be good after the craziness has passed. So we've gone through D, do a plan assessment. We've gone through R, recognize the difference in risk tolerance and risk capacity. I is ignore the noise. So now we've got to get to N. And N, I think, is where financial mutants kind of live. I think that this is sort of the inflection point where our people are, where you listening to this show are. You have to notice silver lining opportunities. A true financial mutant can likely find the silver lining in most circumstances.
Oh man, this is the part I get excited about, because first of all, let's talk about point of maximum financial opportunity. We all, the basic thing, and we even made fun in one of our React videos. We made fun of this Instagram couple that posted, "Hey, this is all you got to do is just you go in and you buy when stocks are low, you watch them ride up, and then you sell them when they're high.
It's that easy.
This system is bulletproof." So you always hear buy low, sell high. What nobody ever tells you is when is the buy low? What does
right.
it feel like? What's going on around you? And that's what I'm going to go ahead and roll it out. I know a lot of you go roll your eyes out because you know, the Oracle from Omaha has this famous quote that everybody rolls out when the market starts having volatility. And here it is. It's be fearful when others are greedy. Be greedy when others are fearful. The buying low concept is guess what? When everybody else is losing their mind because they're so scared and just engrossed in fear.
But here's the hard part. We are herd animals. We all are subjected to the same types of emotions as our peers. So it's often difficult for us to recognize when the crowd is greedy and we should be fearful, or when the crowd is fearful and we should be greedy. We all are susceptible to the cycle of market emotions. You've seen this all the time where we go through these really, really positive high stages of euphoria when everything's looking good. These are, you call these the cocktail times, right?
Yeah.
When you're at a cocktail party and your brother-in-law can't wait to tell you about how he got into the latest cryptocurrency 8 months ago and he's just killing it, right? Or he bought this stock and it's tripled in value. People get so excited because everything is doing well. Everything is doing well. But then things start to change, right?
Yeah, I always think it's interesting because the first few months after a market downturn, you see people go, it's all right, I'm a long-term investor. I'm actually going to double down. I'll go find some extra money, put it in there. But then it keeps going and it keeps dragging on a few more months. You start seeing the fear, the desperation, panic. And this is, I will tell you, this is the point where you hit capitulation. And that word, it's a sinister word because when you see capitulation, this is where people start questioning, the system is broken. I'm getting out of this. How could I be so dumb? We're in a new paradigm. You start seeing headlines with these type things. This is what I want everybody to understand. That is the maximum point of financial opportunity. If you ever wanted a compass or a map that showed you where is buy low, it is when everybody else is like, get me the heck out of this thing. It doesn't feel good when you do it. But if you can do this in the long term, you will be successful. So a lot of people are probably saying, well, wait a minute. We know that you've showed us headlines. Nobody has a crystal ball. There has to be behavioral things we can do to make sure that we're successful in this.
I think it's so interesting, Brian. We talk about this cycle of market emotions, and it looks very, now I'm going back to college here, which is a long time ago. It looks very logarithmic, right? Meaning that like the peaks and the troughs are equal. And so people think about investing as like this zero-sum thing. I'm either up or I'm down. I'm either at the top or I'm at the bottom. But the actual picture looks very different. While our emotions may move that way, what actually happens in our bank account or investment accounts is very different. So Daniel did us a solid. He went and mapped the S&P 500 from 2000 all the way until 2022, showing the last 22 years of market movement. And he was kind enough to superimpose the little roller coaster riders on here, showing you the different points of maximum financial risk and then the different points of maximum financial opportunity. But what you can see is, as we move through time, you can be a roller coaster rider or a yo-yo thrower. You're steadily moving to higher and higher ground as you go through the process.
I just realized the way we could have improved this even better. So Daniel wants to. We could have the roller coaster riders getting ready to fall down, but then ride it right back up. We could put the yodeler from The Price is Right, where they're walking up the thing where you go, yo, going
I'm sorry,
up.
What's he do?
No, I'm not doing that. I don't yodel. But it is one of those things where you could do it because that's the person, it's the yodeler with the yo-yo that's going up.
Yep.
Know that it's not going to feel good while you're going through this, but with a little bit of knowledge, you can know that you're going to be okay, and you can actually see the silver lining, and you can buy low, and then your future self will be like, wow, we got a heck of a deal. I know if you went back in time and looked at the shares that I bought in like March of 2009, those were some of the best shares that I could have gotten because I was the dead bottom of what happened in that great recession downturn. Same thing happened with the pandemic. That was not too long ago in March of 2020, where there are people that immediately had huge turnarounds. That's why I like having a system that buys no matter what's going on.
All right, so do a plan assessment. Recognize the difference in risk tolerance, risk capacity, ignore the noise, notice any silver lining opportunities, and then the K in having a drink is know that this too shall pass.
Yeah, I always think that it's interesting. I mean, we have all these cable channels. It's on the nightly news when the stock market's down. But nobody ever talks about the fact that all this horsepower, all the calories that are spent worried about the stock market. And I love Peter Lynch's quote because he talks about in here is that, the fact that so much money's actually been lost. Worried about this more than actually happened. His actual quote is far more money has been lost by investors trying to anticipate corrections than lost in the corrections themselves. That breaks my heart because you see, and there's all kind of studies out there that show even though index investments make between 8 to 11%, depending upon which ones you're looking at, the average investor will underperform that by several percent over a long-term period. And you're like, why? What happened there? What caused them to not just buy, hold, and get the reward of being a long-term investor?
So let's assume that you were the best investor ever. We're going to call you Billy the Best. In 1980, the average income for Billy was $12,500. If Billy was a great saver, saving 25% of his income, or $261 a month, he would be a great saver. But not only is he a great saver, he has also got the markets figured out. He says, you know what? I'm going to buy at the very bottom of every bear market.
He's got the almanac.
He has the almanac. He's Biff.
He's Biff.
This
he
is
went
Biff.
back. We should name this Biff the Best.
Why do we name him Biff the Best?
We should name him, instead of Billy, he should be Biff the Best. Or maybe Billy and Biff are brothers, and they both went back in time. But he's got the almanac. He knows when markets are going to hit the dead bottom. He saves up his cash and waits and puts it in right at the right point.
So that's one type of investor. Now let's look at unlucky Ursula, great naming Daniel. Again, same income, $12,500 a year in 1980. Savings rate is the same, about $261 a month. But she does it all wrong, unfortunately. Instead of buying at the very bottom, she buys at the very top, at the highest market time before it drops, before it loses. So she's not a very good investor.
Yeah, Ursula goes to the cocktail party and waits for her brother-in-law to tell how much money he made in this great thing at the maximum point of financial risk.
Yep.
And she loads it up. So she's horrible at investing.
And then we have the other one. Then I'm going to call this boring. This is DCA Diane, dollar cost average Diane. And she's same scenario, same income, same savings, but she just buys every single month and doesn't try to time the market. She's not trying to be the best or she's just going to be consistent. So if you look at a picture of when they invest, you can see here are all the market peaks that Ursula invests, and you can see here are all the market troughs that Billy or Biff invests in, and then Diane is just buying the whole time. She's doing other stuff. She's just letting her dollars work. All three of them, when they've worked through the scenario, have saved or invested or contributed the same amount of money. About $132,000 is what they've saved from 1980 all the way until now. Well, Billy, who was amazing at this, his $132,000 has turned into 1.8.
That is amazing.
That's pretty spectacular.
Just take that number in. They got $132,000 invested. You know, he had the almanac, so of course he's shooting fish in the barrel.
Yep.
He's almost $1.8 million. That's pretty good. I think most people would be. I don't know if that buys the casino that Biff got in Back to the Future, but that's pretty respectful.
Pretty good. Well, Ursula, you know, she's probably broke, right? She did it all wrong. Not so fast. Ursula still has $1.1 million. $1.1 million. She invested $132,000 and she's still a millionaire, even being the worst investor of all time. But then there's Diane, right? And Diane was just boring. She invested the same $132,000. Her portfolio, though, is actually the best. She is now a multi-millionaire from just being consistent. She didn't freak out during the dot-com bubble bursting. She didn't lose her mind in the Great Recession. She didn't run for the hills in the fourth quarter of 2018. COVID did not make her pull her soldiers out of the army of dollar bills. Instead, she decided to stay consistent and stick to the plan. And every time things got scary, she had a drink. And that drink led her to be a multi-millionaire. And if you look over the last 70 years, the S&P 500 has dropped by 20%, has gone into bear market territory 11 different times over that period. So right now you're saying, oh man, I just don't know. The market, half the time it's going down, and then the other parts of the time it can lose a lot of money. It is frightening What should I do?
Well, there's several things, just off the cuff feedback. When I saw that stat of 46%, I was like, man, that's almost a coin flip. But then how does that compete with, because then I started thinking about something we share on the show all the time. In a decade, meaning 10 years, pretty much 80% of the time, markets are good. So if day by day it's a coin flip, but I know on a decade, if you look at it from a year standpoint, 8 out of 10 is pretty good. And then I hear the stat that we've only had 20% downturns. Was it 7 times?
11 times.
11 times. 7-11. I guess that's where I was getting it. But 11 times, it starts to show me there's something that's leading me to believe that time has some component in this analysis.
So let's talk about that a little bit. We wanted to share a few quick illustrations with you. The first is one that we have developed here internally. If you look at just a 60-40 portfolio, and when we say 60-40, that's 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio, from 1953 all the way till the end of 2021, and you look at individual year performance, it seems sort of haphazard. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no pattern. It looks a little sporadic, but on average, we know that the average return over that time period is an average return of 9.8%.
I think it's wild because I see the green line there, the 9.81%. And this is 53 to 2021. But you're right, Bo. Just looking at the visual, for those who are listening to this on the podcast, it looks all over the place. Each year is a dot, essentially, on annual performance, and it looks like no rhyme or reason on this scatter plot.
However, if we don't just look at it in isolation, if we don't look at it on a year-by-year basis, but we stretch out our timeline and we say, okay, let's look at returns on 10-year rolling periods, exact same years, exact same portfolio, exact same time period, what you can see now is when you stretch out your time frame, there looks to be a lot more order to it. It looks to be a lot more reasoned. It almost looks like it's cyclical. And now everything kind of compresses towards that average. That 9% annualized decade performance on here is pretty close. And you see, there aren't any decades on here where a 60-40 would have lost money. So that's interesting. When we think about the market, we have to prevent ourselves from focusing on the 46% of days that are down and think more in terms of the long term.
Well, I find it interesting looking at the visual of this, but also making sure I'm doing a good job of describing it for all those who are listening on the podcast. You've already nailed the fact that there's not a single one of these decades that's zero, because this is a diversified portfolio.
That's right.
It's not just 100. We've heard of the lost decade, but that was 100% equity portfolio. And I also find it amazing the ebb and flow of getting close to the average, meaning that it gets close and then it goes apart, gets close. I mean, it really does look almost like a sound wave that's everything, that's got a magnet that attaches it to that average return. This is pretty powerful stuff. So that's very important. Missing the mark, time is incredibly important in this illustration.
Let's talk about, we said that, there's been 11 different time periods where the market has lost 20%. What about those? How do we think about those in perspective? Or there's a great illustration we hear that we want to show here that just compares from 1942 all the way through this year, bear markets versus bull markets. And there's really two things that we're looking at here. For each of the bull markets, how long did they last in terms of months or years? And for the bear markets, how long did they last? And then how severe were they? If it was a bear market, how big was the loss? And if it was a bull market, how impressive was the gain? And what you can see is when you compare these two, even though there were 11 of these periods where the market dropped more than 20%, the bull markets far outpace and are so much grander than the bear markets that exist in our economic cycle.
Yeah, this is what shows. Whenever I look at this bear markets versus the bull markets, it shows why it's good to be an investor, because visually there is so much more money made than what is lost in those short downturns. Pretty amazing stuff if you just look at this visual. I appreciate First Trust is always so consistent with updating this and providing a really good illustration on why you should stay on path, not get into the timing.
And so then we think about, okay, well, I get that, guys. I get that the market's good, but right now the market feels pretty bad. Right now, the market is in bear market territory. How should I think about this? Well, None of us know when the end of the bear market is going to happen and when the start of the bull market is going to begin. But here's what we do know. If we look at all of these bear markets since 1950, on average, the average loss has been about 35%, and the average duration of the bear market has been 14 months. I would not get caught on that because we don't know where it's actually going to happen. This is what I think is interesting. When you think about the recovery and how markets behave, in the first month after the bottom of a bear market, on average, the market has made back almost 15%. In the first year, the market makes back over 43%. And in the first 2 years after the bear market, the market makes back almost 63% on average.
I think it's interesting. When I look at this slide, I always think, man, there's some traps, some logic traps that people will fall into. They know here we are in 2022, and it's October. We know that this bear market, where the market's down right now, 25% from where we started the year, we're about 10 months into this. Well, a logic trap would be you look at this and be like, well, this is easy. I'm just going to sit on the sidelines for the next three and a half months.
Yep.
And then, or pay attention, we're already down 25%. Maybe I'll just wait for us to be down 35%, and that's when I'll jump in. Here's the reality of the situation. And Bo kind of gave the answer first, but I still want to kind of walk you through falling into these logic traps. We don't really know how long this bear market will last. And yes, we're only down 25% right now compared to the average of 35%. But these things typically, the momentum that builds into that 10% could happen in a week. It could happen in 2 weeks. It could happen just in a matter of days, because it's not uncommon that when you hit capitulation, it's going to pile on very quickly. But then guess what? It happens. That recovery, just as Bo shared, is so quick. So if you tried to wait until we could get to 13 months or we got to 35%, whatever your trigger point is, you're going to miss it. Because as you can see, the first month after we hit the dead bottom, close to 15%. But Bo, you've made this point before. Then the next 3 months is 21%. Isn't it amazing that 2/3 of that 3-month performance was made in the first month?
Very first month.
And then you extrapolate that out 12 months. The average rate of return of recovery is about 44%. But a lot of that, close to half of that, is loaded up in the first 3 months.
That's exactly right.
And then you can see how this builds. It turns very quickly. Be very careful about trying to time the market.
And you might be saying, okay, guys, I get that. But does this really matter? How big of a deal is this? Well, we want to show it to you a slightly different way. Let's say that you look at the time period from 1980 all the way through 2021. So over 40 years of market performance. And let's say if you started with $10,000 invested in 1980, what would that turn into? Well, if you just left it invested over that 40-year period, that $10,000 could turn into over $1 million.
That's amazing.
Almost $1.1 million. If all you did is you got cute and you just missed the 5 best trading days, out of all 41 years, you only missed 5 days of activity, your total portfolio drops down to only $676,000. If you were to miss the 10 best days, it drops to $487,000. If you were to miss the 30 best days, so that's really just 1 month out of a 41-year period, your $10,000 only turns into $176,000. If you were to miss the 50 best days in that 41-year period, your $10,000 only turns into about $78,000. When it turns, it tends to turn aggressively. And the only way you get to take advantage of that is if you are actually in the market when it happens.
I find it interesting because I've seen trolls in the past when they see this stat and this chart come up, they say, yeah, but if you did it the other saying, you instead of missing the best days, what if you could avoid the worst days? But unless you got that sports almanac from Biff,
unless Biff showed up for you.
It doesn't work that way. You can't time. Nobody has the understanding of when bad things are going to happen. But what you can control is, hey, look, we're in an ever-changing economy where it's growing through innovation. It's just human nature. We want to make things better. We want to innovate. We want to grow. The economy overall is an expansion over the long term. You can control staying the course and staying invested all days. Remember to always be buying.
Okay, so what can we conclude from this? What are some of the takeaways? We think there's 4 that are pretty high level when we look at these illustrations. Number one, the market is unpredictable in the short term. So if you're trying to figure out what it's going to do in the near term, it's a futile exercise. You're probably not going to have a lot of success in that. Number two is that good markets tend to last much longer than bad markets. So don't let the fear of the bad keep you from experiencing the excitement and the goodness of the good. The third thing is that when the market changes direction, it tends to do so quickly and without warning. If we all knew when the market would turn, we'd all be incredibly rich. Unfortunately, we don't know that. And then fourth, trying to time the market can be extremely costly over time. If you just miss the quick turn, the rapid V-shaped recovery, it may be very hard to overcome missing that time in the market.
This is the money guy difference. I think most content creators would create this slide, give you these 4 known quantities of investing, but not give you the details.
That's right.
We actually, every one of the 4 charts that we just covered explain the why and the nuts and bolts of why this is going on. And what I love is like there's even unsaid things that you just need to understand about investing and staying the course. Number one, the market's unpredictable in the short term. As we showed you, long term, you really can start setting and making assumptions because it gets much more consistent if you can just stay the course and not get sidetracked by your emotions. Good markets tend to last much longer than bad markets. Once again, telling you stay the course. Don't let yourself get sidetracked with this. And then remember, when they change, when we have V-shaped recoveries, yes, markets can be down for extended periods of time. And we can see even there's some false recoveries. But the reality is when it truly hits the bottom, that recovery is going to have a lot of momentum. But I do think it's important to talk about, hey, what will make this recession, or what are we seeing that makes this different from other recessions? Because I've talked about this before. We know the basic definition, but it's typically the causation is different for everyone. It's like every recession has its own little fingerprint, or its own little snowflake of what got us into this position.
Yeah, if you think about the dot-com bubble bursting, 2000, 2002, that was sort of the impetus of that recession. If you think about 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, it was this real estate, housing, subprime bubble bursting. And even if you think about 2020, it was the COVID pandemic, this global worldwide pandemic. The things that start them are different. So the question you're asking is, okay, if we're in a recession right now, what does make this one different? What is super unique right now that perhaps is different from the previous periods that we've gone through?
Yeah, and I think anybody, because there's going to be some definitely ripple effects from the pandemic and the fact that the government used a lot of stimulus dollars. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet added trillions of dollars, and that's worked its way. I mean, we have this inflation issue that just seems like it's getting out of hand. You can sense it, but at the gas pump, you can sense it with housing prices. There's a lot of things. Even the CPI of what the government releases to us shows that we're right under 9%, which is extremely high from a historical perspective.
Yeah, I think we even dubbed this sort of once in a generation inflation, because I'm kind of thinking through both mine and your work and careers. We've not seen inflation like this, and really the last time that we probably saw inflation similar to what we're talking about or what we could potentially be facing right now was likely back in the late 1970s. So this is not something that happens often and is something that is obviously unique. So that just in and of itself is one of the things that makes this one a little bit unique.
And then don't forget, I mean, we came out of the first quarter, and then the government let us know, hey, GDP was actually negative in the first quarter. So that would be the first indicator, hey, maybe something's not great. And that's when in the past, you'd probably have the Federal Reserve or somebody take a stance of, hey, let's go ahead and drop interest rates so that we can go ahead and try to get some type of stimulus going for this economy. They don't have that card to play because with inflation, the prescription for fixing inflation is actually raising interest rates because you're trying to pull back on the money supply. And you can see how this makes this kind of different.
A lot of older, wiser investors have been in the markets for a long time. Perhaps they were investing in the late 70s. Perhaps they were investing during the dot-com bubble burst. Perhaps they were investing in the Great Recession. What I think is really unique right now is that the last two major downturns that we saw, at least from a stock market perspective, happened in the fourth quarter of 2018 and then happened in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. Well, for investors who are relatively new to this, who haven't been participating, the thing that they've seen is that this turns quickly, right?
Yeah.
The downturn of COVID happened so rapidly, and then it corrected and moved positive so quickly that the whole anxiety and fear and depression and panic was super, super contracted. I mean, people were worried about their health. They were scared about other things besides the market. It'll be interesting to see because none of us know where this is going or how long it'll last. It will be interesting to see what does capitulation actually look like and how will today's investor actually handle that if the market gets to that place.
We talk about this analogy often. This cycle is actually more like a yo-yo. You're an individual throwing a yo-yo up and down. You're really good at a yo-yo. You can walk the dog, you can do around the world, but you're doing this yo-yo up and down as you walk up a mountain. So yes, that up and down motion of the yo-yo is the cycle of the economy, meaning that every day you're watching the market, it's going up and down to where it feels like, man, am I getting ahead on this? But here's the part about why you're walking up a mountain is that even though you're going up and down in the short term, when you look back after you've gone up 300 yards or whatever, you go, wow, I've made a lot of progress walking up this mountain. That is the way long-term investing is. We use a zero-sum cycle illustration to teach you the points, but the reality is that we're going higher and higher and higher as the economic expansion, as innovation, as companies learn how to make more money.
So what you need to understand is, okay, if I understand this yo-yo string is going on, what are the things I should keep an eye on? If this is a recession or if things are going to be painful before they become less painful, what are some indicators I should be aware of? Or what are some things I can start cluing into? You begin to start seeing mass layoff announcements. You begin to start seeing reductions in force. We had Daniel go pull some headlines. We're already seeing a little bit of this. Here's one that says, Elon Musk wants to cut 10% of Tesla jobs. Or Netflix braces for more layoffs this week. That was as of June. Robinhood to lay off 9% of its FTEs. Or Peloton is now replacing its CEO and cutting 2,800 jobs. As you continue to see these layoff announcements, that's again a sign that maybe we're entering into some turbulent, uncomfortable, recessionary-esque territory. We've also seen some of this anecdotally. We have a close friend of the firm who works in employee benefits with large employers. So think like hospital systems, school systems, and large private enterprise. And he said, hey, one of the things they're talking about from a health benefit is, hey, if we do start having some large reductions in force, how do we plan for that? How do we go into that? So as you begin to see these things happen, it's just another indicator that perhaps we are in recession, or perhaps this is one of the things that caused this recession to likely feel different than the previous, if we use 2020 as example, than the previous COVID downturn that we saw.
Well, also because I hate to admit this or share this, but you all know it because we talk about peer pressure. Why is peer pressure? It's because we're herd animals.
Yep,
I mean,
absolutely.
we are humans by our nature, are pack animals, herd animals, whatever you want to say. And if you need proof of this, I love, and we're refining this element. And I can't wait to keep as we refine this data point. I love to compare cash levels compared to where the S&P 500 is, because we would think, going back to that cycle of market emotions and then trying to figure out where's the maximum financial opportunity to buy low, sell high, go in when everybody else is scared. Notice historically, Daniel created this slide, like you look at 2002, when the market is getting crushed and it's a peak financial opportunity to be getting some of the best deals out there, we see cash levels spike up.
All-time highs, yeah.
You go to fast forward to the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009, when markets have fallen off the cliff and everybody, and you're like, whoa, this is when you can buy Apple, which is $70 of cash, per share, and it's trading at $107 per share. You know, they have no debt. They have all these buildings. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Nope. People are loading up on the cash.
Yep.
If you were using an indicator like price earnings ratio,
Oh, that's
you
a
hear
great
people
one. Yep.
talk about price earnings ratio. How do you use price earnings ratio to figure out where we are in this economic cycle too?
And again, I, in my opinion, I think too many people die on the hill of price to earnings ratio as the end all be all to valuation. I don't think that that's accurate. I think that can get you into a lot of problems. But I do think it's a helpful thing to look at. And what you want to look at is the average price to earnings ratio over a long period of time. You can kind of pick the periods you want to look at, but look at over a long period of time. And when the market is trading above the average long-term price to earnings ratio, you can begin to say things like, okay, maybe the market is fairly valued or perhaps it's a little frothy. If you start to see the price to earnings trading below the long-term average, that might be an indicator, I wonder if things are undervalued. I wonder if this might be an opportunity for me to get dollars to work at really, really favorable valuations. Again, it's not an end all be all, but it is something to keep an eye on to think, man, if everyone else is running for the exits and everyone else is scared, can I look at some unique fundamental data and say, man, maybe there is more opportunity present right now than other people recognize. And it's the financial mutants that recognize that in the scary times that are really able to take advantage of it. So then we ought to talk about, if we're going to talk about the beginning, I think what people more care about is, what does the end look like? Okay, what are some things that we can think through? What are some things that we can expect? Or historically, how have recessions ended? What have been the tools that have been used to help with that? And is this time different, or are there things unique that make that unique?
This is, I love that we titled this, Is It Different This Time? Because there are some unique things. Is that, look, governments are not fast acting, but it is one of those things in the past when we hit recession status, it's not uncommon for the government to try to stimulate the economy. And what do they use for this? There's really two tools that they use in their arsenal. There's lowering interest rates. We've already told you. That's kind of tough in an inflationary period. The second thing they'll do is that they will do stimulus type of legislation. And we even had a few examples of things that have been done in the past.
Yeah, if you think back to the Great Recession, two things that we immediately thought of were these were attempts by the federal government to hopefully pull us out of the recession. If you remember the Cash for Clunkers program, this article was from August of 2009. He signed into law a bill passed that was basically a way for people to trade in their used old vehicles for cash to get money back into the system. And then also in 2009, President Obama signed legislation extending and expanding the first-time homebuyer tax credit. I want to say it was like $7,500 if you were buying your first home. Again, it was a mechanism to try to get money out into the economy. Well, the problem with that is we've just come through a lot of stimulating activities by the federal government. So it seems like perhaps that could have been one of the things that's leading to the inflation we see right now. So there's a unique mandate they have of trying to hold inflation down, but also prop up economic activity. It's two forces acting in opposite directions of one another.
Yeah, I think that's why this content will be so valuable, is because in the past, we've kind of learned to lean into some of this stimulus activity. How this recession recovery will be different is in the fact that we probably won't get the interest rate decreases we've had in the past. It's probably hard to get some type of stimulus legislation passed because we just came through the pandemic where a lot of that money and resources was used. So this is going to fall more on what are the values, what is going on in the innovation cycle and the business cycle, and do we hit a point that markets are so low in their costs that everybody cannot help but just pile in to kind of see where the recovery, to see if they just take advantage of the opportunity. And that does tie in nicely, Bo, that historically, markets recover fast because you know how this is. When we hit capitulation, people will sell just for the sake of comfort.
Yep.
They won't care, hey, what does the company have? I've already shared with you that, look, in 2008 and 9, you could buy Apple for $107 to $108 a share when it had $70 of cash per share.
Yep.
That's the point emotionally that people are like, I don't care, get me out of this thing. And that's so you'll oversell. Just like we overbuy, we oversell. And that's why markets recover very rapidly. It's called a V-shaped recovery.
Financial markets make money typically about 8 out of it every 10 years. But you are going to find we go through recessions every so often. And I think it's important to know what to focus on, what to forget.
Yep. So we're going to go through every decade. Let's start right at the beginning with the 20s. Obviously, for those of you that are in your 20s and you are going through this recession, this is kind of new territory. You've likely not experienced this before. So a lot of this, you're thinking, this is sort of uncomfortable, not good, sort of scary territory.
The first thing we ought to jump into is really, how do you focus on this? And the first thing I think you should focus on in your 20s is, are you keeping your job?
Yeah, first you got to get a job, right? So if you're in your early 20s looking for a job, it's getting that very first job. And then once you're in there, one of the big things that you ought to focus on through this recessionary period is, how do I keep my job? What are the things that I can do to make sure that I stay employed? Because unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, during a recession, when there are reductions in force, when there are layoffs, you might likely be one of the most at-risk employees at your employer.
Yeah, it's unfortunately employers typically go with like a LIFO employee situation where it's last in, first out because you're the least amount of experience.
Here is the second thing I would encourage folks in their 20s to think about. Do you have cash on hand to handle emergencies? This is that place where you just want to make sure you have saved enough. Your first few paychecks have come in. You've started to make quote unquote real money. You want to make sure you have enough in the bank to keep you from letting your financial life go into the ditch.
Well, this ties into the financial order of operations too, because we know, unfortunately, your peers, and this isn't just for people in their 20s, of Americans, somewhere between 56 to 60% consistently can't come up with $1,000. So you can really give yourself a tremendous head start if you can just make sure you have enough money to keep your financial life out of the ditch.
Because unfortunately, we don't know those unknown things that might come our way. And that emergency fund, the beginning of that emergency fund, is the thing that keeps you protected. So make sure you get and keep that job. Make sure you have cash to cover emergencies. And then the third thing is, recognize that you have one of the most valuable resources in the world on your side, and that's time. Early on in your 20s, assuming that you do have stable employment, you have stable cash flow, right now you should think about starting that automatic wealth building process.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I felt like the first two were unfortunate because you are brand new, and sometimes that gives you just not the ability to have the staying power at either your new employer or even have the ability to have a lot of cash in the bank. But this is, wealth building is so much easier the earlier you start. In your 20s, you have something that people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s don't have. And that's exactly what Bo said. Lots of time. Take advantage of it. Don't miss out on this opportunity.
Maybe all you're doing is putting enough in your 401k to take advantage of the free employer match. That's great. Your future self will thank you for getting those dollars working. And this is the way it worked for me, Brian. When I first started my 401k and I first started contributing to a Roth, those dollars that I put to work in 2008 and 2009 during the last recession are some of the most powerful dollars in my entire army of dollar bills. So we've talked about where you should focus on in your 20s. Now let's talk a little bit about what to forget. And I think this is a huge one, Brian, that you and I have both talked a lot about. Perhaps you need to forget the baggage that you brought into adulthood. Maybe it's those bad ideas that people in your life told you were truth that were not truth. I'm talking about things like this. Maybe the stock market is rigged only for the wealthy people, or investing is like gambling, right? You're just kind of throwing your money out there and taking risks. Or maybe you've heard someone say only the smartest people can make money in the market, so you have to learn how to time the market. And you shouldn't be investing now. You want to wait for the bottom so you can get in at the bottom and get out on the top. Some of those things that you have been told may not be true, and this is a great time for you to learn that so you can change that cycle.
And we created an illustration to kind of show that wealth building in reality actually takes some time.
Yeah, if you think about that $1 that turns into 88, in the first decade of your working career, that $1 at age 20, by age 30, it's only worth $3. That's not blowing your mind. That's not changing your life. But if you give it enough time, it gets more and more and more exciting. It's part of the path of that $1 turning into 88, but you have to give it enough time. I think a lot of folks are trying to go figure out, how do I do the get rich quick? How do I go buy the penny stocks? How do I get into the crypto at the perfect time? In actuality, that's not the way that wealth is built. It is a marathon, not a sprint, and you have to understand that going into it at the beginning. All right, Brian, let's talk about our 30s, right? So there's a chance, right, if you are in your 30s now, you were probably working during the last recession, but you were still early on in your career. If you're in your 30s today, you were somewhere between 16 to 25 in the year 2008.
Let's clear the noise and let's do what we do here at the Money Guy Show. Let's tell you what to focus on.
Yeah, so the one thing, this is very similar to what we said in the 20s. In your 30s, you want to focus on, how do I stay employed? I would take a special exercise to pay attention to the industry and your company's financial health, as well as your own unique skill set. Am I continuing to develop the skills? Am I continuing to increase the value that I add to my employer? Or are my skills becoming less valuable? Is the technological world in which I live in making me more easy to replace? I think for folks in their 30s, there is nothing wrong with finding out how to make yourself peacock at work. How do you make yourself a unique value add proposition for your employer, that they start saying things like, man, I could not imagine my team, my business, my firm, my enterprise without so-and-so, because they are such an integral part of this team. The more solid you can insert yourself in that position, the more security you'll have around your job.
Yeah, I definitely think making yourself sticky or indispensable is a tremendous value when things get scary. Yep. And let's tie into another thing I think is important. You can focus on risk management.
That's great.
And risk management, especially in your 30s, is making sure that you have your emergency fund. We're beyond $1,000 at this point, like having your deductibles covered and so forth. Now we're more in step 4 of the financial order of operations. I want you to have 3 to 6 months of cash reserves built up. On the insurance side of life, let's talk about, you need to make sure you have life insurance, like term life insurance, especially if you have children or people who are counting on you. You need to have good health insurance, disability insurance, as well as property and casualty, including an umbrella policy that sits on top of your homeowners, your automobile policy. You just want to be protected from any and everything that could come your way.
Yeah, insurance is one of those really frustrating things that we pay for it and we hope we never use it. We pay for life insurance, we hope we don't die. We pay for disability insurance, we don't want a disability. We pay for property and casualty insurance, we don't want bad stuff to happen to our things. So naturally, if we're getting into a recession and things are tight and we're starting to think about places where we can cut, we start looking at our insurance. Oh, do I really need that? Should I really carry that? What is likely to happen? Be careful of allowing yourself to fall into that trap, because the reason that you have that insurance is in the event that something happens you did not know was going to happen. It helps you plan for the unknown unknowns of this world. I think if you start skimping on that, cutting some of that out, trying to make it a cost-cutting measure, you are putting yourself out there on the risk side of things where you do not want to be.
Yeah, I think another thing that helps, because we're talking about some of the negatives when we're talking about staying employed, the cash flow management. I want to bring it back to, wealth building, but that's, it's hard when you're thinking about building wealth, especially in your 30s where there's so much compounding opportunity. It's hard to increase your income.
Sure.
So you can save more. You can focus on your cash flow, though.
That's
you can
great.
figure out ways that maybe you can cut back or trim back your expenses, because the multiplying effect of your wealth, meaning if you start investing when markets are getting beaten up, it is the best opportunity to maximum point of opportunity for you to be building wealth for the long term. So focus on getting those dollars to work.
Yeah, you hear us talk about $1 can still turn into $88 for a 20-year-old. $1 can turn into 88 by 65. For people in the 30s, your dollars still have juice. For a 30-year-old, $1 can still turn into $23 by the time you get to retirement. Even for a 39-year-old, someone at the end of this decade, $1 can still turn into $8. So in your 30s, it's likely this is the first time where lifestyle creep has kind of started to happen. Maybe you're being a little bit looser on your budget. You're spending on things you didn't used to spend money on. during a recession is a great time to reassess what am I spending money on, what things am I spending money on, and do I actually want to be spending money on these things, or are there areas where I can cut back and reshift those soldiers to start working inside my army of dollar bills?
Well, and I think it's, let's go ahead and give some hard love here. I think that it's important to focus that our goal, we want you to be saving and investing 25% of your gross income. In your 20s, that can be aspirational because I understand in your 20s, you're just trying to figure it out. In your 30s, I need you to be saving this 25% because of this wealth multiplier that we're sharing is so powerful. So, Bo, let's talk about what to forget because I want to make sure, because there's lots of noise out in the world when we're going through these downturns and recessions. What should people forget? For younger people in your 30s, people will sell you sexy, sizzle ways to cut a corner off of your wealth building process. I'm talking about crypto, jumping into leveraged real estate way before you actually have the resources to do it well. Complicated life insurance products. These are all the individual things that could be going on that will sidetrack you from the true path to creating financial independence.
I think it's so interesting, Brian, that oftentimes with a recession, it's coupled with a bear market. And we're seeing that right now. That's actually happening. Present day, we're in a bear market. And a lot of times folks want to say, oh, well, look, clearly the stock market doesn't work anymore. We're in a bear market. Buying index funds doesn't work. Buy and hold is for losers. Long-term investing is out the door. That is just silliness. Don't fall prey to the trap that you need some different solution to get you through this. We've been through recessions before. We'll be through recessions again. Things that have worked historically are likely to continue to work moving into the future. Now let's talk about folks in their 40s. Because if we're going to be honest, if you're in your 40s, this is not the first recession that you've gone through. And likely you can look back and say, okay, how did I do in 2008? What were the good decisions that I made and what were the bad decisions that I made? What were the ideas that I jumped on that I should not have? And what were the opportunities that I missed? You get to kind of do an assessment of where am I today and where was I 14 years ago and what things have changed? How is my income situation different? How are my family circumstances different? How are my looming obligations like paying for college or becoming an empty nester? How are those things different than they were the last time I went through this?
I want anybody who's in their 40s, you've been around long enough, you can recall what it was like in 2008, 2009. But you are probably now in a completely different financial situation, hopefully for the better. So now you have more resources, you have more flexibility, more margin to do this recession on your terms instead of just hanging on because you were in that messy middle previously.
All right, so let's talk about where to focus. Here's the very first thing I think that folks in their 40s ought to be thinking about. Do you actually have a plan? Have you started answering the question, what is my number? You know, in your 20s and 30s, we really focus on savings rate. We say, hey, you need to be saving 20 to 25% of your gross income. If you can do that, you're setting yourself up to have options in the future. Well, in your 40s, you want to start answering the question, all right, what have I been doing this for? What is my number? What's the goal that I am working towards? How do I know if enough is enough? How do I know if I'm ahead of the curve? How do I know if I'm behind the curve? How do I know if I don't even know where the curve is? In your 40s, you should begin to have some clarity around the answers to those questions.
Yeah, and look, we'd be crazy if we didn't share. The financial order of operations is going to be tremendously valuable. I think for somebody in their 40s, look, I could give you the website for a free deliverable. It's moneyguide.com/resources, but really, more likely, you could benefit from learn.moneyguide.com, where we actually have a full deep dive course. If you're not even at the point, because maybe you are realizing blind spots. I got 7 figures that I'm out there flopping around this crazy financial market. Maybe you need to take the relationship to the next level and bring in a co-pilot. These are the type of things that are very important when you're in your 40s.
All right, so step 1 is, do you actually have a plan? Step 2, Brian, I want you to speak to this one because this one is something, you know, we obviously see this with clients and we counsel clients through this, but you've actually lived with peers who have done this. You have colleagues and friends and neighbors. Oftentimes, it seems like in our 40s, we start moving the goalpost. Well, if I could just get to this income, or if I could just get to this asset level, or if I could just own this house, or if I could just go to have this vacation property, and we keep moving the goalposts further and further and further and further out. And in your 40s, you have to answer the question, why? What am I doing that for?
Well, I think it's so important, especially if you focus on the why, because I do think that there can be, and boredom's not the right word, but distractions, and the fact that when you're in your 40s, you're now far enough outside of when you graduated where you were struggling just to get traction in your career. Now you're actually starting to earn some peak earning years. So income's coming in. And if you don't have a centeredness in the why, you can keep changing your life to really try to keep up with the Joneses. And I'm telling you, the why is where the contentment lives. The bigger house, the
Nicer
boat
car.
or RV and the nicer car, that stuff is not, that's a temporary hedonic treadmill dopamine hit. It's not actually getting you closer to the goalpost of success. So just quit moving the goals and objectives. That's why we always say the moving the goalposts is it's a mirage. Be careful, put up some boundaries so you know the why and you can create a plan around that.
Now, you said something interesting, Brian. You said in your 40s, you're likely in your peak earning years. As a reminder, there is still time for you to automate your wealth building process at this point in time. Maybe you were doing a good job following the financial order of operations in your 30s, and you're doing a great job saving 20 to 25% of your income. But now your income has increased. Maybe you're starting to get bonuses. You're starting to get employer incentives. You've got RSUs. You have other things coming in. It is not a bad idea, especially right now while everything is on sale and you're still accumulating, to revisit your saving strategy. Am I actually saving 25% of my gross income? And am I putting all of the dollars in the right buckets where they should go so that I am ultimately building towards that number that I need to hit? Let's talk about some of the things to forget in our 40s. Here's the first one. The desire to go to cash to feel safe. I mean, odds are in your 20s, maybe you didn't have a portfolio. And in your 30s, your portfolio started to build. You started to save a little more. Well, in your 40s, this is likely the place where you're starting to have a substantial sum of assets inside your army of dollar bills. And you start having this thought that, man, I've just worked too hard to get here. I've been saving really good and the market's making me feel uncomfortable. Maybe I just need to sit this one out. Maybe I just need to go to the sidelines, let this thing smooth out a little bit, and then I'll get back in.
Well, I even think some people in their 40s specifically, they might not be like your 50 and 60-year-olds who are getting closer to retirement. They think about doing a apple cart turnover. But I do think 40-somethings, they run the risk of they already have a chunk of money in their portfolio and they say, hey, instead of making sure I am taking advantage of these huge buying opportunity, allocating resources, keeping the 25% flowing towards investing, a lot of people say, you know what? I think I got enough in there. Let's just focus on other things I need to be doing in life right now. That is a mirage.
Here's another thing that we often hear people say in their 40s, right? They have this desire to go to cash to feel safe. We also hear them say, oh, well, I just don't have enough time. The market's already passed me by. I should have been doing stuff in my 20s and 30s. I am out of luck. That is just not the case. If you're in your 40s and you just start saving, starting at zero, we want to show you how much of your pre-retirement income you can replace if you start saving 25% today. So a 40-year-old, and we assume that someone has wage increases of 1.5%, so nothing crazy, and we assume you can invest your dollars earning only 6% rate of return. So we have very conservative assumptions. A 40-year-old that starts today saving 25% of their gross income, by the time they get to retirement at 65, would be able to replace 58% of their pre-retirement income. For a 45-year-old, even if you just start saving today, you'd still be able to replace 39% of your pre-retirement income. These are still pretty remarkable numbers for someone who hasn't done any saving up until this point. You still have a long window where you can begin building assets for your future.
Well, here's what I think is super powerful about this too. Now, look, I'm not saying don't start investing just in case my 20 and 30-year-olds are watching and cheating ahead, but I do want people in their 40s to recognize more than likely there's going to be some other influences on your retirement living. When we retire, we typically spend, since you're not having to save 20 and invest 25% of your income, that's a huge saving. If you don't have any debt as you approach retirement, that's another huge savings opportunity there. So there's a good chance that 60%, that 58 to 60% is going to cover a lot of your living expenses. And then what if, because the older you get, closer to 50 especially, more than likely there will be some type of Social Security or social safety net that will be sitting there. You get to add that on top of what you have saved. So whether there's outside money coming in or your living expenses in retirement are less because of the not needing to save for retirement anymore or not funding that mortgage anymore, you can still do it even in your 40s.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. So you don't have enough time. Here's another thing that we also hear, and I think this is a mindset shift. There's this idea of that, okay, when a recession happens, well, it's happening for everyone else, right? It's not. I'm in a good spot. I've done well in my career. I've worked to a great spot. I've been saving. So maybe I don't really need to worry about my employment, or maybe I don't really need that emergency fund, or maybe I don't really need to be saving because I've got plenty of time to save. Don't assume that a recession only affects everyone else. One of the things that we see are unknowns happen. This may be market volatility, your portfolio falling. This may be unemployment. By no fault of your own, your employer has a reduction in force. Or maybe you're someone who said, okay, I've been paying on my mortgage for a number of years and I've got tons of home equity inside. I'm just going to use that as my cash reserves. And all of a sudden, real estate values drop, your home equity dries up, and you are left holding the bag. Make sure that just because things have worked out really good at this part, to this stage of life, you don't take your eye off the ball and leave yourself exposed and out there on the risk spectrum. All right, Brian, let's talk about the 50s now, right? So this is an interesting decade because in your 50s, you're likely in one of three places. You're either planning for financial independence, but it's still a ways off, like 7 years plus, or you're planning for financial independence, but it's creeping up quickly. You're inside of 7 years, so it's coming up really, really fast. Or maybe you've already made it. You've made it to financial independence, and now you are counting on your army of dollar bills to sustain you for the rest of your life. So this is a really interesting decade. There are some very important things you ought to focus on, and there are some very important things that you ought to think about forgetting.
Yeah, let's talk about the focus part, because this one always... people get this a little confused, especially my entrepreneurs, because when we talk about your risk profile, everybody immediately always goes with more the emotional feeling of, am I a cowboy where I can handle, all the risks? That's my entrepreneurs.
Yep.
Or am I the person that's just always a safety player looking for safety? No, that's risk tolerance. How well you tolerate or handle or process risk is one thing. There's a whole nother component of risk called risk capacity, meaning you just might not have the time to recover if it takes a long time for a market to recover for you, especially if you're living off of these resources in retirement. Pay attention to that second component of risk, which is risk capacity.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you look at the chart on the screen right now, if you think back to 2008, Great Recession, market lost almost 40% that year. Well, if you lose 40%, you don't have to make 40% to get back to break even. You have to make 67% to get back to break even. Well, if we just assume an average market rate of return of 9%, it would take you 7.5 years to get back to break even. However, if you could cut your losses, instead of losing 40%, you only lost 20%. So you have half the volatility of the market. Instead of having to make 67% to get back to break even, you only have to make 25%. Again, at 9% average rate of return, you're back to break even in 2.5 years. You want to make sure that your portfolio is structured in such a way it has enough time to recover based on what your ultimate needs are and when you're ultimately going to need to start pulling off of these dollars.
Yeah, and Bo, talk about, because this is one of those things where you talk about, do you have a team?
Yeah.
I mean, because if you want to know how well, because this is the point where it's game time. This is no longer napkin financial planning where you're just doing withdrawal rates and those type of things. This is when you really do need to kind of start figuring out, would my plan survive when I hit, turmoil and chaos?
Yeah, again, one of the things that we do for our folks as they're planning for retirement, we're doing a lot of this right now, right? As we're going through this recession, we are living some of the iterations we've modeled for our retirees. Have you stress tested your portfolio? Have you said, what happens if in the year I retire, 2022 happens? What if inflation is through the roof? And what if housing is going crazy? And what if the market enters into a bear market? Is my plan set up where I have a high probability of success? I'm going to be able to survive this. I'm going to be able to make it through this. What a really good co-pilot, a really good personal CFO can do for you is help you understand where are your blind spots. What are the things you've not thought about? What are the things that you are over-focused on that likely won't matter? What is the thing that's going to give you a peace of mind as you go through that? Most of us only get one crack at going into financial independence. A lot of times when we make the choice to leave the workforce, it is very, very difficult to get back in after we've done that. So you want to not just measure once, measure twice. You want to measure 4, 5, 6, 7 times to know that you know that you know when you enter into this next phase of life, you've thought through all the contingencies and you are well prepared to approach it, no matter what the financial world or economy throws your way.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into kind of the things that I think about that you should forget. And this is going to kind of tie in. You'll see I'll bring it back full circle in a minute with kind of the closing point. But there are two extremes that kind of happen, I feel like, when it pertains to investment risk. The first is the more aggressive, because look, I go out there and I follow the bogleheads. I see what the FIRE movement boards are out there, all the what was on Twitter within the financial creator content, and everybody's just saying, just buy the market.
Just buy the market.
So
it's simple.
Easy.
Go do
just
it.
VTI all day, all the time. You just buy the market. You'll be okay no matter what.
Yep.
And look, we love index investing. It's not like we're against index investing. That's what we do with our money. That's what we do with our clients' money. But I do want you to understand that's an aggressive extreme, as we already have covered with risk capacity versus risk tolerance. You might have the tolerance for high risk, but you don't have the capacity. You need more diversification just to mitigate the volatility while you're pulling this money out of the portfolio. You're still going to have a lot of money in those index funds, but you want to mix it up. So just buy the market might be too aggressive.
Yep.
The other side of this, Bo, is, and you see a lot of insurance products get sold when we hit any type of volatility, is because people say, if you want to sleep at night in retirement, just go buy something that's guaranteed and safe. And I worry that's too far the other extreme. I mean, this is one's too hot, one's too cold. I want you guys to navigate this like financial mutants and hit that Goldilocks, the mix that's just the perfect mix for you, that takes into account your goals, takes into account your age, your risk profile, and make sure you navigate that in a smooth as silk way so that you don't get caught in these emotional extremes that just tear you up inside and you don't turn into the best version of yourself financially.
And look, these are kind of hard things to do. They're hard things to figure out, especially if you're coming from a different vocation. Maybe you were in the medical field, or you were an engineer. You were fill in the blank of the vocation you were in. If you weren't in the financial world and you weren't in portfolio design, you may not know the exact right way to do that. How do I make that shift? Because it's not an apple cart turnover thing. It's an adjustment. It's a glide path through time. So perhaps you're saying this in your 50s, well, I can do this all by myself. I got this far. I'm just going to keep doing it by myself because I want to save a few bucks. Why would I spend money on hiring a financial advisor or bringing someone in to help me navigate this when I can just DIY and figure it out?
Look, it's not a cheap endeavor to hire a financial advisor. I get that. But this is not an easy transition. There are so many things that I love. Now, look, we're not just asset managers. I think that's the problem. I think people don't understand the difference between a financial planner and then somebody who charges you 35 basis points to put you in all their index funds at their asset company. That is not financial planning. That's asset allocation. That's just one little sliver or component of what a financial planner does. But I can tell you, I had this realization. I am so glad to have somebody on my team. That's the other thing. When I went to the content team, When I told them, hey, I'm bringing in somebody who's going to be our navigating source, our team member to make sure we do this the best way, because they're going to tell us how to launch the book. They're going to tell us how to market the book. The relief in Daniel's eyes and Reeby's eyes was tremendous. Guys, think about this for your own financial life, because this can get into Social Security, taxes. When do you do Roth conversions? This is not stuff you want to screw up. Consider taking the relationship to the next level, because peace of mind can be it's priceless.